Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at THECONNECTSHOW for podcast show details. Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host or the station. Folks, you're going to want to listen to this podcast. I have a very, very special guest with me today. She is amazing, and I mean amazing. My guest has quite an impressive resume, and I'm just going to say some of it. My guest is Patricia Hynes, who was director of the Trop Rock Center for Peace and Justice for 10 years and is now a board member. Pat is a retired professor of environmental health from Boston University School and an environmental engineer. Patricia Hynes is author of Hope But Demand Justice, a book that we are going to discuss, plus many issues. Did you ever hear of burn pits, what the soldiers had to endure over in Iraq, Iran, and how that affects their health? You're going to want to stay tuned to this podcast, folks. And I want to welcome Patricia Hynes to Chatting with Betsy.
Thank you very
Pat.
much. Thank you, Betsy. I'm very honored and grateful to be your guest today in your program.
Oh, well, I'm honored that you are on. First, I always ask the authors, Pat, what motivated you to write this book, or Hope But Demand Justice?
Mm-hmm. Well, the motivation probably goes back a good 50 years. It's grown into what it culminated in this book, Hope But Demand Justice. But I was fortunate to come of age in the era of the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, the Women's Movement, and the environmental movement. With the Civil Rights Movement, which impelled me to teach African American children in an inner city school, everything I learned from them I have never forgotten. And I think particularly the issue of inequality. It was in front of me in the classroom, and when I took them home, many living in public housing projects. So in my book, Hope But Demand Justice, there is a good section on inequality. I've also followed the statistics and data during COVID and saw verified again that because of inequality, the greatest victims of that, the most numeric victims of that, were people of color. The Vietnam War clarified my conviction that war is not the answer. For what can war but endless war still breed? And at the Boston University School of Public Health, I spent a good time studying the effects of war on women for a particular seminar. And I was stunned by what I learned, that women and their children are the largest victims of war, and for so many reasons. First of all, there is, of course, sexual abuse in war. They end up as refugees for the most part. And the hospitals, for example, become dedicated to wounded victims, soldiers of war, and so consequently the reproductive health of women is in rapid decline. trafficking in women is augmented by war. And I've even read that with this war in Ukraine, there were traffickers from other European countries who were hanging around train stations looking for potential women to entrap and girls to entrap in prostitution. So the effects of war, not only on soldiers, which I have written about in my book as well, which are severe, also, especially urban war, as we're seeing in the Ukraine, but also around the world, also have tremendous and equal impacts on women and girls. So that was one study that I did just before retiring, and it just impelled me to, once I retired, to work for a Peace and Justice Center, and this Trap Rock Center is in the region of Western Mass where I live. Another impact, and this was the women's movement of the early 70s, in terms of becoming a self-conscious and a dedicated feminist. I have learned along the way in reading that the degree of women's equality is the most important factor for the relative peacefulness or degree of conflict in every society and country. This is a study that was done using UN data by researchers, a large team of researchers, and they have shown that the equality of women is deeply linked to the degree of conflict, as I mentioned, and or peace in a country, which is why for those working for peace and ending war, also working for the equality of women is so important, because one has a direct correlation with the other. The other is that studies have shown that women are critical in areas of conflict to peacemaking. This was especially demonstrated in Liberia during the terrible wars there about 10 years ago. It was women, Liberian women, Muslim, Christian, joined together and basically forced the men to negotiate the end of conflict. At the same time, this was the 70s, the environmental movement was really gaining a strength, and I was so taken by the messages that the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. These are Native American messages. So I went to graduate school in environmental engineering and initially worked in the EPA Superfund program and ultimately in environmental justice partnerships and environmental projects in Boston's public housing and its low-income neighborhoods. And they would be projects like lead poisoning, how to get lead out of the environment in inner cities, reducing asthma and pesticide use in public housing, and also promoting community gardens for a little bit more self-sufficiency for affordable and organic food. So all of those movements, as I began graduate school and then work afterwards, have influenced my worldview on what is justice work, what is peace work, that it's interrelated with environmental work, with the equality of women, with civil rights movements, and consequently, all of that awareness and those connections impelled me to put together the book that I just have, Hope But Demand Justice. I have many other books that I've written before that, but this one really collects all of the issues and that are so interrelated, even though many efforts to solve them are done single issue at a time. And so I will just, if I could, Betsy, just read briefly from the brief overview of the Hope But Demand Justice. Okay, this collection of articles published between 2010 and 2021 charts a quest for peace and justice for all on our planet, humans, and the web of life in which we live. These pieces, each I have 9 themes, and I have individual articles that go with each theme. These pieces were conceived in a time of deepened and deepening social and economic inequalities, expanding weapons budgets, and the earth reaching tipping points of no return from existential climate crisis and species extinction. Many of our local, national, international issues are included here. Among these are nuclear power and weapons, the climate and biodiversity crises, the COVID-19 pandemic, militarism and war, veterans, the possibilities of peace, international collaborations, and the pursuit of sexual, racial, and economic justice. Though chapters are conceived by topics and themes, they are not conceived in silos. Rather, they reside in the web of interrelated politics, the environment, economics, and all manifestations of political and social justice and injustice. In other words, the dimension world in which we live. Those who work for God to save public forests, to save the lives of COVID patients, those who speak out against the futility of war, those who strive to create a future of human rights and the fullest justice for girls and women and people of color, and those who labor to eliminate nuclear weapons are a lifeline through this collection, culminating in the final chapter entitled Hope. And I'll just finish with a quote from Václav Havel. He was the first president of Slovakia. The more unpromising the situation in which we demonstrate hope, he writes, the deeper that hope is. Hope is not the same as joy that things are going well or headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good. And so hope is the engaged heart, actively seeking, and whatever good that you seek, that one seeks, in my case, peace, justice, fairness for all. So that
is amazing.
A slight overview of Hope But Demand Justice, which was published by Haley's Press, HALEY''S. So thank you for the chance to talk about these issues, the way I've tried to bring them together. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. Your book sounds so fascinating, and this may not be the right term, but I have no other way to express it. Very deep. It's a very deep book, a lot of thought, a lot of things to contemplate and think about. And your book cover, I love it. I think it's colorful. And can you tell us about the book cover, because it's very interesting. And where can people purchase your book, Pat?
Oh, it can be purchased through Amazon, but also directly from Haley's Press, HALEY''S Press. It's in a town in western Massachusetts, Athol, and ATHOL, but also online it can be purchased.
Oh, okay. And your book cover, we were talking before I started to record, and you had an interesting story about the cover of your book.
Yeah. I had been wrestling for a couple of months while I was finishing this book with the title. And I went to see an exhibit of African American quilters. The name of the group is Sisters in the Cloth. And it's a group outside of Boston, and they came to Western Mass to show us the various quilts that many of them had done. And they showed a quilt, but the quilter wasn't there. But when I saw the quilt, I thought, this is it. Because the title, the quilt itself showed a very strong black woman with a sign, Hope But Demand Justice. And she was obviously in a city, because you see high rises. And I got her information, wrote her, and asked for permission to reproduce that quilt on the cover of this book. She sent me the permission, and she also gave the explanation that she was inspired to do this quilt by her granddaughters, who were now activists in Black Lives Matter. And so that is explained also inside the cover of the book. So I basically used her cover to, in a sense, convey that sense of working with hope for transformation of society. And I'm glad that you like it. Most people have been quite taken by it. But I just felt it was inspirational that I attended that quilt exhibit and saw suddenly what I wanted for the cover and also what I wanted for the title. So I'm immensely grateful to her.
That's interesting. I'm fascinated with book covers. My audience they might think I'm a little cuckoo because some book covers just, intrigue me, and I have to ask the author, how did you come up with that?
Yeah.
And there's usually a story behind it.
Yes, it was given to me. It was an inspiration. I thought if I hadn't gone to that exhibit that day, I would have missed it. I think I was meant to go, clearly.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, Pat, some things we just can't plan. It's just meant to happen.
Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you, it was a day that I had planned with my partner and a friend to go to a classical concert at a place called Tanglewood in farther in western Massachusetts. It's quite famous. And the Boston Symphony plays there. And it was a rainy day. And this Tanglewood, you typically sit outside and with a picnic. So we couldn't go. And then it just happened that I'd read the newspaper to see this exhibit was showing that day, and in a local town. So we went there. And then I realized when I saw the title and the cover, shall I say was given them, I realized that this was meant to be. I'm not formally religious woman, more spiritual, but it did feel like intentional on some greater power's part.
Yes, you just have to go with your gut, instinct and things that happen. And I think that's really. I love the name of the title because hope, but demand justice. I even take that into everyday life. I tell caregivers, I have a caregiving group. If you see something, you see an injustice, you need to speak up.
Good.
We need to speak up when there's an injustice, because if we don't speak up, how are things going to change if we keep silent? Yeah. We can't keep silent.
Yeah, that's such an important lesson, for children, for you working with caregivers. I mean, it's a lifelong lesson to speak up when you see injustice. And also that the other part of this is hope is not a wish. It's not a passive thing. It is the same. Václav Havel, he was a playwright also, besides the first president of the I said Slovakia, but it was the Czech Republic. He also said, hope is the engaged heart. So hope is action. And in taking action, like speaking up against injustice, it does feed your hope. It strengthens your hope. So I think it is myself too. It was her title, and obviously it's a lifelong goal and a lifelong insight.
Yes, and if people don't demand justice, there won't be any justice. People think, Pat, I'm sure you've encountered this. People think, I can't speak up, my voice doesn't matter. Your voice does matter, and you can speak up.
And I think
everyone can.
Yeah, it's especially effective if you do it aloud, and more so than even writing in a local newspaper, which I do. I do that. But my experience across life in working, particularly in the work setting, was if you speak up in public, it has a profound effect on behalf of something that you think is unfair, a decision, a choice, an action. I think if you do it publicly, it takes a lot more courage than writing it in a letter to the editor or mentioning it in just between friends, among friends. If you speak up where it's colleagues, let's say it's a citizens gathering or a public gathering, so many people you don't know. I think it takes a lot more courage, but I think it has a lot more effect. So good for you, speaking up with the caregivers.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Can you tell the audience about the Trap Rock Center for Peace and Justice? What does your organization do, and how people can get involved?
The Trap Rock Center for Peace and Justice, I'll first say, is our website is traprock.org. If people would like to look into it, it is located in Western Massachusetts, and that's where our work is focused. Although some of us, and myself included, have partners in other parts of the world, like Vietnam, also Sierra Leone, Cameroon, and these come about as a result of fortuitous meetings, the partnerships. But essentially, it was founded in Western Massachusetts about mid-1980s, and it was a time in which there was tremendous national activism around nuclear weapons. There were, perhaps 10, 20 times as many weapons then as there are now. It's as a result of the effect of that kind of organizing that ultimately Reagan and Gorbachev, that was late 1980s and into the early 1990s with George Bush Sr., where there was a negotiation to reduce dramatically the number of nuclear weapons. I mean, we still have enough to sort of destroy the world many times over, and they're more powerful. But it began in the midst of that particular activism and issue. And so it was very central across the country. The person who was the director of it, a founder of it, co-founder, director of it, Randy Keeler, his name is on the cover of the book. He did a foreword to my book. He did a tremendous amount of activist work mobilizing across the country to put pressure on government. And this was during Reagan's administration to reduce and ultimately eliminate nuclear weapons. From there, it grew in the 1990s and into, of course, this century. But one of our important programs, which is 1990s, it's at least 20, 25 years old, is a peace summer camp for youth here in Western Massachusetts, started by Sarah Pirtle. And I think that has become a significant part of the work that we do is peace education with youth, she in particular. And we have added, as I was speaking about earlier, we have added issues added first justice to our title. It was originally the Trap Rock Peace Center. Now it is Trap Rock Peace and Justice, Trap Rock Center for Peace and Justice. And the reason being that there is no peace without justice. And that has widened the umbrella of work so that we have members of our board who work with in another organization, Racial Justice Rising, members who work on issues of peace in the Middle East, myself with partnerships with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, particularly their chapters in Africa, and a partnership with Vietnam to plant 10,000 trees. And so we have we're active in the state peace action. It's called MAPA, Massachusetts Peace Action. And so we're very open also to issues of justice, economic, gender, racial, coming under the umbrella of our work. We have a program called the Children's Books Collaborative on Peace, Justice, and Environment. And with that, we give $1,000 each year, focusing in most cases on low-income towns in our area. It goes to their libraries. in order, in collaboration with us, to buy children's books on the themes of peace, social justice, and environment. And we have also are working with a family literacy center which works with poor immigrant Central American women and their little ones, children, to buy, giving them a grant to buy books for extremely young children, like 1 through 3, and a reading program for the mothers and children. It's literacy for both. That has been our recent Children's Collaborative partnership. And then with a group, peace group in Sierra Leone, they were our choice one year to essentially give them the $1,000 to purchase books, which went right to local schools, and in which the teachers and also the superintendent said that they would essentially sponsor environmental programs, social justice programs with those books. So that's just an example of, it was quite a range, and much of it is shaped by the members of Trap Rock and the members of the board particularly, that there's a lot of freedom to take initiatives and to form creative multi-issue partnerships. So and all of that is evident on our website. Just going to it, the first page of it, without even going farther, essentially manifests most of what I'm talking about. One other thing that is something I feel, a program that is most doable and appropriate for schools across the country and youth groups across the country. And it is called the Young Peacemakers Program. This is 20 years old. It was started in 2000, and it was started after there was violence among youth, the first being in Colorado in the high school there. And then we also had some incidents here in Western Massachusetts. So the interfaith group here and Trap Rock got together to say, what can we do? And this was actually, you might say, the beginning of the tragic mass shootings that have happened in schools, but elsewhere subsequently. And so they came up with the idea that each year we would send a request out to local schools, youth groups, church groups that work with youth, and ask them to fill out the recommendations, the forms that we sent with recommendations for outstanding youth who have done creative peace and social justice, maybe ones who are active bystanders, as you were talking about earlier. You speak up when something is wrong. We have a training here in our area for active bystanders, and especially focused on youth, and then they take that back to their schools. Well, we get about 12, 15 young people nominated each year by the local schools, and then we have an event in May, which is a public event which basically promotes them, the work that they've done, awards them their photos and coverage in the local newspaper. But it's an event that has become kind of classic in our area. It's one that would be very easy to do elsewhere. And it's one, I think, that is very motivational for youth to live up to, their best ideals. So that's something that is on our website. And if anyone is interested in what it's like, how you do it, etc., they could find information about that on our website. It's called the Young Peacemakers Program.
That is so awesome. It is such an honor. And I feel so grateful and blessed to do this show, to have people like you on, Pat, and to talk about what you're doing to help others. I never heard of Trap Rock Center for Peace and Justice till I met you. I'm in New Jersey. I never heard of it. So this is a great opportunity for people to know about the work that Trap Rock Center does and, what your book is about. And I just it inspires me, actually. just get so excited and passionate because it's beautiful. It sounds like a beautiful organization to help people, and I just love that. I had to ask you if you could explain about the. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, explain about what?
The burn pits.
Yes, I'll be glad to. I just want to add one thing. First, I do want to thank you again, Betsy, for this opportunity. And I want to reflect back to you that the passion with which you speak and the inspiration that you feel, it's a sign of yourself, which is something I want to make you aware of as well. It's not just me on this program, it's you as well.
Thank you.
But I did want to say, too, one thing we have done in the past few years regularly is a vigil or a standout, and this would be on the commons of a local town called Greenfield. And it could be about a dozen of us. Once in a while there are more. And once in a while we have music and things like that. But essentially we come with signs, and signs that speak to war no more, and especially the particular war going on now with Russia and Ukraine. But and so we stand on the common 11 to 12, holding our signs, trying to connect with people walking by, driving by, and essentially it's we call it a vigil or standout, and essentially it looks very minimal and very simple, and you might question, is it effective? So I have asked everyone who was inclined to write a brief essay, why I stand or why I vigil. We have photos of individuals with their signs and groups with their signs. And we are going to have an exhibit in August in a local arts center, which will have the photos next to it, the short essays that people have written, some music. But what I want to say is convey is that the essays are extremely moving, and they speak from the person's heart and soul. Each is very different. But what they did for me in collecting and reading them is that I felt a depthful quality and purpose and meaning in what looks like a very simple public event, this standing out with our signs, 11 to 12 on the Greenfield Common every Saturday. But it gave dimension to it. And so we're having the exhibit so that the public can come in, can read these, can witness the photos of us standing out, and essentially begin to grasp, I think, the importance of being a witness. And as we spoke earlier about speaking up, when we see an injustice, this is a different version of doing the same. We are conveying in our signs in public what many people who pass by agree, say, can agree, they thank us, etc. But it's reinforcing that in a public way. So I just wanted to let you know this was another aspect of our commitment.
That's really cool about the essays because, I found out, Pat, we never know how far our ripples go. We don't know who's listening. We don't know who's taking in, who we're helping. Yeah. And we just never know, how far it goes. And, someone passing by could see that sign and contact you, contact Trap Rock Center, and get involved.
Yes.
This is how it all starts.
Yes, and many of the essays that they wrote said the same, that we don't know if it's if it's touching anyone, if it's reinforcing their beliefs, if it's converting anyone, we'll never know. But that's exactly the kind of, it's not even a risk, but the hope, the hope that you have. So we'll go on, and you had asked me, because I know our time is moving, about the burn pits. And do you have any background that you want to say before I do talk about them?
Well, I know that they're toxic, and I know that they're very unhealthy, and the soldiers and other people who live in that area will be affected by this for years to come. And but if you could tell the audience, explain.
How have you learned about them, Betsy? How did you learn about them?
I have heard about it. What made me think of it was I live in New Jersey, so when 9/11 happened, you could see the smoke. And a lot of people who were at ground zero had gotten cancer or some other elements just from being, respiratory, just from being there, sifting through the debris. Now, that was 9/11. I can't even imagine another, scenario of a burn pit where they're burning, batteries and other toxic chemicals that these people are breathing in. God only knows what they're breathing in, getting in their system.
All day, every day. So I'll give some background on them.
Sure.
So first of all, I read the recent book, what was a few years back, 2017, that was written on it, and it was called on burn pits. It was written by a veteran, and the title was The New Agent Orange, Military Burn Pits in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the author is Joseph Hickman. He was a former Marine and Army sergeant. So these burn pits are called this generation's Agent Orange. The open fire pits operated on more than 230 U.S. military bases across Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as some other Middle East countries, during our wars there. Every kind of waste, from plastics, batteries, old ordnance, asbestos, pesticide containers, and tires, to biomedical, chemical, nuclear waste, dead animals, and human waste, body parts, and corpses. All was incinerated in them. I want to also add that these burn pits were on site at these military bases. Now, I used the word incinerate, but the word incinerate misleads. However, it suggests an enclosed burning facility with pollution controls. These barbaric burn pits were dug on military bases in the midst of housing, work, and dining facilities without any pollution controls. They were open air. Tons of waste, an average of 10 pounds daily per soldier, were burned in them every day, and all night, blackening the air, coating clothing, beds, desks, and dining halls with ash laden with hundreds of toxins and carcinogens. The burn pits recklessly violated the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Defense waste disposal regulations. And predictably, base commanders, this is according to Hickman, who did interviews with hundreds and hundreds of soldiers, predictably, base commanders temporarily shut them down when politicians and high-ranking generals visited the bases. I want to add that the estimate is that there were about 3.5 million soldiers exposed to them. Since his book, and also more recently, there has been legislation and I will describe that, what the current situation is. So most of them have been shut down subsequently, and I'm not sure what's in their place, but we, of course, moved out of Afghanistan and Iraq. Apparently there are still some burn pits left in Syria and Egypt. But I want to say that we left, for the most part, and closed those, but they are left in the country, in those countries, so that there would be exposure of Afghanis and Iraqis who might be sort of traveling through those bases now that they've been closed, coming there to sort of pick through things that they might want, etc. But some even more perilous than the burn pits themselves, some of the U.S. bases were built on the remnants of Iraqi military bases, and this is with our second war in Iraq, 2003 onward. And those Iraqi military bases had been bombed and flattened by U.S. airstrikes. A handful of those bases, at least 5, had contained stockpiles of old chemical warfare weapons, among them the nerve agent sarin and the blistering agent mustard gas. The American military base burn pits were placed and dug within the chemical weapons residues without a single soil sample taken to essentially look for any contaminated soil. So this was a handful of those bases. I'll just add that my understanding is that President Biden's son, Beau, was stationed at one of those handful of bases that had been built on old chemical waste residue of Iraqi military bases. Now, he quite quickly, when he came back, developed very serious symptoms, and it was of a rare brain cancer, which has been associated with exposure to these burn pits and the chemical weapons residues of the burn pits, and he's, of course, died. So President Biden is aware of that, and I've seen that he has raised that issue. So he is in support of some new legislation that is working its way through the House and the Senate. And I'll just add that the new legislation, it's called Honor Our Pact, PACT Act. It is to be voted on any day in the Senate. It will need 60 votes in order to become a law. And the good thing about it, I have read some criticisms of it, that it doesn't go far enough. But the good thing about it is that within it, it provides for the presumption, the medical presumption, that cancer, respiratory, and heart disease in veterans who served in Iraq will essentially, they will be entitled to health care and benefits. In other words, they don't have to prove it's presumptive illnesses. They don't have to prove that this illness came from their time in Iraq. And that means that all who served in Iraq, especially if they were on bases exposed to these burn pits, will be treated as victims of the burn pits and be able to get, if this law passes, be able to get VA health care benefits. That, I must say, was controversial, and also the fact that it took even more years for that same presumption of exposure and therefore entitlement to health care benefits for Agent Orange for Vietnam vets. This is the precedent for this particular act, and for us to keep in mind that the burn pits is one of many tragic environmental exposures, toxic exposures, and extremely toxic exposures that veterans of recent wars have had. Of course, Agent Orange being the first that we're aware of anyway, that it was presumed that our soldiers weren't exposed, that it was sprayed from the air on, quote, enemy territory. But in fact, it was handled on the bases, and there was lots of exposure. And so they now have, since the early 1990s, the presumption that if they have illness, particularly it's a set of like 19 or 20 illnesses where research has shown that it's likely due to Agent Orange, that they basically get health benefits from the VA. But keep in mind, we used depleted uranium in Iraq, the Iraq War too, and depleted uranium has many this is a radioactive substance, and it also has chemical effects. So there's 44%, I believe, of the first Iraq War, Gulf War veterans are disabled. And typically it would be like memory, muscle fatigue, things like that. We have military Superfund sites and burn pits in the United States. In fact, the majority of Superfund sites in the United States have been military sites because of the toxic weapons and chemicals used there, and also the arms industry, the place where all of the weapons for the war and these toxic chemicals are used. Together, they are the majority of Superfund sites in the U.S. Most recently, research has shown that a chemical that is called a family of chemicals called PFAS are in firefighting foams and used on military bases as well as our 750 military bases around the world, and that they have contaminated the drinking water in U.S. bases and in the overseas bases as well. It's an extremely toxic chemical that has many serious health effects on women and men and on fetuses as well. And I'll just add that in addition to these toxic chemical and radioactive exposures, that the largest institutional cause of climate emissions from fuel use is the United States military. They are considered to generate 5% of the greenhouse warming gases, and more than many other countries, just 147 countries as a result. More than 147 countries, the U.S. military contributes to the climate crisis. So overall, that you see the burn pits is one of a handful of environmental pollution, serious environmental pollution that is a result of the degree of militarism and military that we have in this country and abroad.
Wow, that is a really profound, shocking news. And I do know about the water, some of these marine camps, base camps. I interviewed 2 doctors last year about Parkinson's, and they have in their book about the contaminated water, and people were affected, and that it can lead to Parkinson's disease.
And do you remember which particular contaminants that they focused on? Usually solvents. I mean, before PFAS, before that, solvents were often from leaking underground storage tanks on military bases were often what was essentially considered the primary, you might say, contaminant that would cause illnesses. Do you remember by any chance what they studied and that they linked to Parkinson's? I'm just
the water I don't know, but I know with the insecticides or pesticides it was paraquat.
Yeah.
But with the water, I don't remember. But I mean, I never heard of the paraquat, and then then you started hearing about it.
Yes. Well, it's true about insecticides, especially. It's one of the suspected sources of this kind of mysterious cluster. I mentioned it earlier: memory loss, muscle fatigue, etc., of soldiers who had been in the first Gulf War. there was a lot of use of pesticides, insecticides around the bases. And so certainly pesticides, insecticides are powerful environmental toxins.
Yes. Oh, this is so interesting, Pat Hynes. I know you have to go. Thank you, a million thank yous for writing your book and for the work that you are doing for the human race. And I really want to encourage the audience to go buy your book, Hope But Demand Justice, and go and look at the Trap Rock Center website. All the information will be in the blog that Jeannie White, our station manager, writes. So please read the blog, folks. And I want to thank you for coming on again, Pat Hynes.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you're welcome. You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you for this
thank the audience.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I
my
thank
pleasure.
The audience for listening. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yes, audience, thank you for listening. And please share this podcast to help others. And this is what Chatting with Betsy is about. And I want to thank Jeannie White, who produces the show, who's station manager and writes the blog. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible and gives people an opportunity to be heard and learn about valuable resources, information, and how you could get involved and make a difference in our world. This is real information, folks. This is, not science fiction. This is actually real. And I have to say, with each war, there has been something. World War I, I think it was the mustard gas. World War II, it was the
atomic bomb.
The atomic bomb. They used to test soldiers with the radioactive bombs that they were testing. And, people getting sick. Vietnam, I don't know what Korea's was, but Vietnam was Agent Orange. It's always something, and we have to stop poisoning our environment and ourselves, because I'm telling you, folks, it's serious business. Go back to, I think it was last April, when I interviewed Dr. Tom Dorsey, and I can't remember the other doctor's name, but Ending Parkinson's Disease. Go back, look at that show, hear the show, because this is exactly what Pat Hynes is talking about. These insecticides, the pesticides, contaminated water, it's dangerous to us. It's going to give us diseases.
And then we leave, much of this is left in the environment of the countries that we have conducted war in.
Yes, neurological problems. It's real, folks. And, it's not no hokey pokey. It's not woo-woo. This is real. And I'm very passionate about it because, you know what, I wonder, my husband, Matt, had early onset Alzheimer's. He worked with chemicals, around chemicals. I live in New Jersey, so it's Cancer Alley. The pollution, who knows, folks? I don't know. It can't be proven. But you know what? It makes me wonder. It really makes me question. There's a lot of Vietnam veterans who have early onset Alzheimer's. Is there from Agent Orange? We don't know. But do I get passionate about it? Yes, because people are dying. They're dying from this stuff. And they're going to continue to die. It's affecting our children. Our children's future is affected by it. So that's me getting on my soapbox. I can't help it. But
passion is so important.
Yes, it is. So I want to thank you, Pat Hynes, very much. I'd love for you to come back on my show because there's a lot of information that you have that I think the show needs to be dedicated to a lot of your topics, really. You're welcome, and especially the one with women and human sex trafficking. I just interviewed someone who's a former sex trafficker, but you know what, with the wars and how women and girls, young girls get sold, that would be a great...
Yeah, it's the most vulnerable context in which the trafficking can happen. And I have read through activists in Germany that there have been, people have spotted incidents of traffickers waiting in train stations to lure, of course, through lies, but vulnerable Ukrainian women and girls.
Yes. Oh, that would be a wonderful topic. Well, thank you, Pat Hynes. I can't thank you enough. And best wishes on your book.
Thank you very much. Okay.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Well, folks, if you missed any of this podcast, you can hear it all over again wherever you hear your favorite podcasts. I'm on Spotify, Spreaker, CastBox, and it is free to subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. So make sure you subscribe, and you can hear my phenomenal guests. And yes, I do have phenomenal guests. So in a world where you could be anybody, folks, or anything, please be kind. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.
Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at THECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details. Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.